Hello, welcome to the TY podcast hosted by
Michael
and Abby. This is the first podcast of Cross and Passion College Kilcullen. There are 5 different groups talking today, ranging from modern world problems to movies.
So our first topic is conspiracy theories on what I believe to be were the parents to blame for the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Let's hear what they have to say.
Personally, I think that Madeleine's parents had something to do with her disappearance. When Madeleine's mum went into her room and seen she was missing, she screamed, "They've taken her," and also closed the window. The mum let people into the apartment and let them touch everything, and people think it might have been her way to destroy the evidence, and the parents refused to do a lie detector test on it.
In my opinion, I think the parents done it as well because of the way she said they've taken her. What does she mean by they've taken her? Like, who has taken her? And also, they were having dinner at a tapas bar that was about 30 minutes there and back. Like, it took 30 minutes to get back to the table. So that is a bit far to leave your children just while you're going to have dinner. And at one point, Jerry went to watch a match. But the time it took to watch the match, it was also enough time to walk to the coast and back.
In my opinion too, I think that the parents did do it just because when they went in and they found out she was missing, first, like, the door slammed shut because the window was open, and then she closed the window. But they found out she was missing at around 10 o'clock, and then obviously all her friends and everybody arrived at the apartment at like 10:15, but they didn't ring the authorities to come and start investigating as soon as they can. They waited like an hour or so to actually ring them, so I just thought that was a bit strange.
I think that the parents did it. I think they gave Madeleine sleeping medicine to make sure she'd sleep while they were out, but I think she had a bad reaction to it, or she overdosed on it, and then they didn't know what to do, so they just got rid of the body because there was blood found in the boot and behind the sofa and all. So that'd be a bit weird if they got the car 24 days after she was missing.
It's also a bit strange that the parents didn't stay in the resort for that long. They left after a while and went back home, and they didn't return often. It did take the authorities 5 days to send out an official missing persons report, which is a bit suspicious, and also that they didn't use the babysitter service provided by the resort.
And there was also cadaver dogs involved in the investigation, and they found traces of blood in the boot of their car, the rental car, and behind the sofa. So I thought that was just really strange. And then the night that she did go missing, if that was me, I would have set up to try find her, but they decided to go to bed, to go to sleep.
A close friend of the McCann family seen a man holding a little girl that looked a lot like Madeleine walking past, and at the time she didn't think anything of it, but once they found out Madeleine was missing, she thinks it might have been her.
For that, that was Jane Hanner, and it was actually ruled out because the police spoke to that man and he said that he was getting his daughter from the child place in the hotel.
But to be honest, I can't see parents doing this to their child because the bond between a child and the parent is very strong. So if they did have something to do with the disappearance, there might have been a reason that no one knows why. Because I just can't see a parent killing their child or having something to do with their child to go missing.
Some people also think that she was taken from the apartment when they were at dinner and trafficked, because at the time there was a lot of traffickers in the area, or some think she might have left the apartment on her own and gotten into an accident. So yeah.
Also, that I've said that when she went into the apartment and Madeleine wasn't there, that she left to tell everyone, but she left the door open with the twins still in there. And I just don't think someone would do that after finding out that their child's missing.
When they found out she was missing at 10 o'clock, everyone was in the apartment within 10 minutes. They rang the authorities at 2 a.m. Was it a coincidence?
Wow, these conspiracies really do get you thinking about what did happen to Madeleine McCann. Okay, next is a group having a debate on the education system. Let's talk about that.
So what do you guys all think of our education system here in Ireland?
I think certain subjects are put towards academics and kind of leave out creativity. And then also I think certain subjects are not needed in the sense of like we don't use them all the time.
I would agree with you somewhat, but I think that certain subjects like English, Irish, maths and another language are important for the rest of your life because you will end up using them in some part of your life.
Well, I don't do Irish and I haven't since in 4th class, and that goes along for a lot of people in Ireland, and I think it's a bit ridiculous that it's needed for college applications, and because I just don't have that, and it's because I'm dyslexic and that's not my fault, so there's nothing I can do about that.
I can see where you are coming from, and I do agree that you shouldn't need Irish for like certain courses in college that you almost definitely are not going to need Irish for. But I do think that we should keep doing Irish in our schools because it's an important part of our culture and heritage. And a lot of people say that the language is dying out, and they might argue that this is more the reason to stop doing it. But I think this is more of a reason to keep doing it so it doesn't die out and we can keep our language.
Only like under 10% of Ireland actually does Irish outside of school. So I think it is a dying language, and I don't think there is a need for it in schools, as it's forcing children to do an extra subject that is just not needed because we don't use it in after school. So
that is a very valid point, but I now want to branch off into a different aspect of the school education system.
Another point is that kids can't express themselves that easily, and one way they express themselves is by dyeing their hair or styling their outfits, which they cannot do because there is a rule on that.
I agree with you completely, 'cause I know from personal experience I don't like the uniform. It's uncomfortable and I don't feel comfortable in it. And one of the easiest ways for people to express themselves is through how they dress, and the school doesn't allow that, which I think is unfair.
I feel like they should add even a bit of colour into the uniform, because everything is so dull when you look at the students and even in class, which makes, I think they want us to be calm and just, they don't want us to mess in class or disbehave or anything like that.
I get your point, but there's some kids that just, don't really want to get up early in the morning and pick out an outfit, and I can also see the point of it being easy to access a uniform.
I agree with that too, but I think people who don't want to wear the uniform should have the option. It would get messy, but it's just, yeah. Okay, I screwed that one up.
Also, the quality of the jumper is actually disgraceful. Every single jumper I've gotten within half a year has ripped at the sleeves or at the trim, so it definitely needs to be improved.
I would definitely agree with that. I do believe that the quality of the jumpers has to be improved, but I think that they are really handy in the morning when you don't want to have to think about making up an outfit. And back to what was said about the hair colour, I can see where they're coming from, but it's quite an old-fashioned way of thinking. They're kind of preparing you for jobs that might have specific requirements for you not to have over-the-top hair or loads of piercings. But I do think the hair rule on the colour is kind of a bit far. I don't think that's very necessary.
And I feel like especially in secondary school, that's a time when kids need to express themselves and find out who they really are. And I feel like dyeing your hair will help, and styling your outfits and doing stuff like that would help you find yourself.
Yes, I completely agree with you. Jobs have certain requirements, like nurses. They obviously can't have a lot of piercings for more safety reasons than anything, but school is not a time to be restricting teenagers. It's a time to let them figure out who they want to be.
That's all we have time for now, but join us next time where we'll have a more in-depth discussion into this topic.
Wow, guys, that was very interesting to hear about. Our next topic is stereotyping.
Hello and welcome to the Stereotypical Podcast, where we discuss some common stereotypes. I'm Nicole, and with me today we have Roisin, Ciara, Brandon and Jack. Our first stereotype is that women belong in the kitchen. How do you feel about this?
I believe that the reason this is a stereotype in the first place is because decades ago this was the case. Men usually went to work and women would stay at home to do the housework and take care of the children. But times have changed and things are a lot different. A lot of places still don't treat women with as much respect as men, but as years pass it's improving. Both men and women can cook in the kitchen, and it's very different from decades ago. Women have a much better and stronger role in society, and men and women both have a role to play in the kitchen and in the workplace. In conclusion, no, women do not belong in the kitchen, and it's not just their job and shouldn't be up to them to cook.
Some very interesting points here. What are your opinions on the idea that all Arabs and Muslims are terrorists?
A big reason for this stereotype is because of the terrorist group ISIS, who have become very popular over recent years. Unfortunately, these are the group of people that spring to mind for a lot of people when they hear Arabs and Muslims, but the truth is that they are a very minor group of Muslims, and the rest of the Arab and Muslims community are everyday normal people, just like us, because it's because of the very, very small amount of people give them a bad image when the truth they're normal humans just like us.
Wow, some fascinating ideas here. And finally, how do you feel about the view that boys are better at sports than girls?
The debate between boys and girls have been going on since the beginning of humanity. The truth is that neither gender is better than the other. When it comes to sports, males have a slight advantage because of testosterone, which males have more than of women. It gives them a little more strength, but this does not mean that they are better at sport.
To be good at sports, some people, regardless of gender, are naturally born with a talent for sports. But you have to train and practice to be better at something. Whoever puts in the most effort will get the better outcome. And the more dedication you give something, the better you'll be at it. Gender shouldn't be a factor involved at determining who is better at a specific sport.
Thank you all for joining me today. Next week we'll be discussing some new topics with a new panel of guests. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys. I definitely agree with that. Next up is a debate on whether the Saw movie is good or not.
My name is Connor and I'm joined by my co-hosts Aaron.
Hello.
And Jack.
Good evening.
In this episode of Hateable Masterpieces. Today's topic is the Saw franchise. This episode has been sponsored by a generic VPN company. Don't trust us, we got hacked. So, can you briefly introduce our listeners to the franchise, Aaron?
Well, Saw movies are basically a group of people are put into a situation where it's kill or be killed, as they're put in a load of traps where where something from their past is used against them, drug addiction, alcoholism, and they have to find a way to get out.
Anything to add, Jack?
Not really. I think Aaron summarised it pretty well. It's a series about people with a lot of moral and personal difficulties being tested by a serial killer in order to see if they are worthy of living on by giving up their vices.
Very interesting stuff. So, Aaron, what's your opinion on this franchise?
I think it's total whack.
Right. Jack, from our pre-broadcast talk, I got the impression you're quite the fan of the franchise.
Well, yes, I am a fan of the franchise. The first three movies, I think they work well as a trilogy of movies that tell one large story. But from the fourth movie onwards, I will concede to the fact that they do degrade in quality. But it's a degradation that works in a sort of comedic way where you can enjoy it ironically, like Wiseau's The Room, for example.
Right. So, what would be your favourite movie, Jack?
Favourite movie? No better than The Start, in my opinion. It's a great introduction to the scenes, what is going on, and the ending is it makes you think, just to say it without spoiling anything.
Right. Very interesting. Aaron, what would be your favourite movie?
Probably the first or second one. They both are very good movies and can work by themselves. Watching them back to back is really good as well.
So, on to the interesting stuff. The traps. I know very little about the Saw franchise, so Aaron, what are the traps like?
I think the traps are...
Here, let me say it. In my opinion, the traps in the series, they are a sort of physical and more lethal representation of the vices that each of the victims are put into. And it's a way of true self-sacrifice. They are able to escape it and avoid death.
Yeah, what he said.
So, is there any particular traps either of you favourite, to put it lightly, as they are quite gruesome? I know of one, the reverse bear trap.
That's a classic. One of my favourites as well. Pretty gruesome when we get to see it in action. One of my favourite parts of the later series, which are all total whack. Anyway.
What film is that from, Jack?
That's the 7th out of 8 films that the reverse bear trap is seen in action, but it does appear in the first film.
So there's 8 films in the franchise. How has it lasted this long?
It didn't. It's whack. Like I've said before, and I'll say it again. Garbage.
Anything to add, Jack?
The franchise was seen as the movie that you would see around Halloween because they were produced rather quickly by Halloween each year, and people will come around to see them mainly for how creative people would be killed off, I will admit that, but there's also the factor of how the hell does the story work together, and that's what I find probably the most enjoyable thing for me.
So the story is rather complex?
No.
Complex in a... how do I put it? It's complex in a way that Tarantino tells the stories.
Hang on. You can't compare the Saw movies to Tarantino, okay? The first two are pretty decent, but Tarantino makes like a masterpiece. This is like comparing the Mona Lisa, okay, to garbage. Literal garbage. The first two are pretty good, and then it's just trash from then on. I'm sorry. You can't compare the two. There's no comparison.
Well, I do agree with that in a certain sense, but if you would let me finish, the comparison Tarantino is sort of... it's like Tarantino mixed in with those weird psychedelic colour pictures you'd see from 60s. It's like two vastly different things combined together to make a rather complex and sometimes confusing story.
Are we watching the same movies?
I'd say so.
So, I remember, Jack, you saying it took you a very long time to learn the plot, if there even is a plot.
Yeah, it took maybe a year or two in order to remember every single detail of the plot. It would probably take a lot shorter amount of time if you just get the general gist, but for me, someone who likes to analyze things very in-depth, it's sort of a thing where I would want to know every single minute detail and get every single last ounce worth of the story, which took about a year or two, I will admit.
How can a story about people being trapped in extraordinary situations be so complicated? Surely it'd be simple to make.
Well, no, because they keep adding these pointless twists trying to replicate the first movie, which is similar to... basically, the first movie is someone's lying on the floor dead, turns out they're not dead and they're the killer the entire time, okay? Pretty decent twist. Sorry for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, okay? But every time after that, they just try to replicate it again, like, oh no, somebody else in the room was the killer the entire time? Who knew? And they were working with the killer since, like, 1930. It's very confusing.
Doesn't sound like my type of movie, but Jack, I'd probably guess you disagree with that.
Yeah, the twists can get a bit stretched out at times, but the story doesn't look at just the victims and the traps. It also looks at the police who are trying to get to where everyone is located before too many fatalities happen, and it also looks on the serial killer's side and his philosophy and why he is doing these killings.
So, in these movies, are characters really important?
Yes and no. You have, like, 3 main characters that you want to get through, and the rest are just adding to the kill count at this point. They just want to make it more gore to get it over that PG-13 rating, so people actually think it'll be decent.
So, then nothing but cannon fodder?
Well, there are some forgettable characters that I can't remember off the top of my head, but majority of the characters who are put into these scenarios, they are sort of put in there because they met the serial killer before the movie happened without even realising it, and slowly over time they realise this is why I'm here and I got to sort this out before I end up dying.
And filming styles, is there anything that makes these movies particularly unique?
Transitions. In the first two or three movies, someone would walk through a doorway and it would then cut like with them walking through the doorway onto like a street or something, then into like the crime scene, which was a very unique shot in the second movie. And like in the first movie there's the iconic shot of him yelling game over and slamming the door into the dark. That's also a really iconic shot. Those are mainly the 2 standout ones.
So you both agree those are the only 2?
I'd say there are a couple more good scenes. Like in the second film, the ending of the first shot was recreated in order to emphasize the first sidekick that was revealed, and I believe when the first apprentice or sidekick to the serial killer was revealed, I found that really good. And that's the first scene I can think off the top of my head that is also really good, other than those other 2.
Interesting debate, strong arguments from both sides. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our segment, and I will have to leave to call an ambulance, for Aaron has been stabbed by Jack. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
That's a pretty good debate on both behalves, but it still wouldn't make me want to watch the film. Next we have a discussion on modern propaganda.
Hello and welcome back to Crack with the Boys. I'm here with James, Tig, Oscar and Michael. And what are we talking about today, Oscar? So we found a show in a free computer class that's suspicious enough called Motu Pathlou, and my colleague Oscar is going to explain what it's about.
Motu Pathlou is a very strange animated kids TV show. It's set in India with the 2 friends, Motu and Pathlou. They live together and they're both 40-year-old inventors. Now it seems innocent enough until we get to the episode Army. The Army episode takes place on India's Independence Day, where Motu and Pathlou end up getting seemingly conscripted into the army to fight against an unnamed enemy, which is presumably Pakistan because of the presence of Pakistani flags. The army claims they were tricked into giving the land to Pakistan and so are attempting to take it back. Just the weirdest part about this show is its absurdity. One of the characters can literally fly if he smells food. He flies across the Indian-Pakistan border and he begins to eat all of their food. And when he's finished eating, he then uses some sort of weird matrix karate moves on the Pakistani soldiers attacking him.
And so after he takes out the presumably Pakistani soldiers, he finds an a helicopter, and him and Pathlou hop in the helicopter and fly it upside down up to a tower where there's Taliban members holding a bunch of Pakistani civilians hostage, and they start taking them out with the aeroplane blades, and they make the Pakistani or Taliban soldiers jump off. And it's very confusing. Just the whole thing is an absolute, just a mental, just episode of a mental TV show, and I don't know what to make of the whole thing. What can you think? What can you make of it, Tig?
To be honest, I'm not sure of what to make of the show. In one way, it could be a harmless TV show that we are looking into way too much. But on the other hand, it could be a propaganda tool used by the Indian government to indoctrinate children. Besides this sinister possibility, the show is oddly funny.
But it's funny in such an absurd way that it would probably really stick with Indian children. I don't know, I feel like they'd remember the plot as in India good, presumably Pakistan bad.
Yeah, so that was Motu Patlu. Thanks very much for listening, guys. We've been Crack with the Boys. Schlater.
Okay, well, I generally don't know what you get up to in your free classes, but I'm actually quite worried.
Thank you for listening. We've been your hosts, Michael
And Abby.
and hope to see you next week on the TY podcast.
You're going to hear it, Katie. You're going, way! Right before. Hey!